Hello and welcome to the Coder Career Podcast. My name is Cameron and I speak to the movers and shakers in the technology industry where we can learn from what they've learned, what advice they'd give to people earlier in their careers, and what they're planning on doing in the future. Today's guest is Alfie Whattam. Alfie is a highly experienced recruiter who runs his own company called Alfa. Alfie joins me on the show today to discuss the strategies that you can use to stand out to recruiters, and as well as that, where he thinks the technology industry is going from a recruiter's perspective. If you enjoyed today's episode, Alfie also has his own podcast called the Alfie Whattam Podcast, so do make sure to check that out. The link's in the description. But without further ado, here is my conversation with Alfie Whattam. Hey Alfie, thanks so much for joining me. How you doing?
No problem. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Great to have you. So for listeners and viewers of the social media clips who are not aware of you yet and maybe haven't come across you, particularly on places like LinkedIn, who are you and what do you do?
So my name is Alfie Whattam. I'm the founder of Alfa Technology. So we recruit top software engineers for growing teams across the UK. That's what I spend 90% of my time doing. And then in the free time that I have, I host the Alfie Whattam Tech Podcast. We've done over 100 episodes. We speak to the world's leading digital experts, everyone from tech billionaires to best-selling authors to CTOs, dev leads and beyond, about what's happening with the future of technology. I do quite a bit of speaking at different events around tech and hiring and recruiting. Wrote a book teaching personal and professional development with careers and in people's lives. What else? I'm a dad. I'm a husband. That basically sums me up.
A very busy guy, basically, is what I'm getting from that. And your podcast is really, really good. So I definitely recommend people check out your podcast. I'll have it linked in the description, actually, for people, because you've had some fantastic guests on there recently. So people should definitely check that out. So in terms of the technology industry, obviously you're on more of the recruitment side. How did that journey start? Did you do the classic thing of falling into recruitment? Because as a former recruiter myself, before I learned to code, that's basically what happened to me.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a wild story in terms of how I got into recruitment. So growing up when I was a kid, I got really interested in magic as a hobby,
Okay.
like magic tricks. Started performing for friends and family, and then started to get quite good performing at shows and events. And before long, I was performing all around the world and in different countries at corporate events for celebrities and world leaders and billionaires, and performing at their private conferences and trade shows and that sort of thing. Went on a couple of TV shows. Britain's Got Talent was the biggest one. Had my own TV special at one point as well, and really was able to build a career as a teenager, really as a professional magician. It was a lot of fun, but it wasn't what I wanted to dedicate the rest of my life to doing. So it taught me a lot of skills around confidence, around presenting, around showmanship, around marketing yourself, and being a hustler and all of that good stuff. And I took those skills, that knowledge, and kind of by accident built a recruitment / talent company around magic at first. So I'd be doing a show one night in Spain or Italy or somewhere, and I'd get requested to be somewhere else around the world doing a different show, but I couldn't be in two places at the same time. So I'd call a magician friend up, get them to do the show, and I'd take a margin. So I built a magic recruitment company by accident. Realized that it was a lot of fun, but it probably wasn't career-wise the best industry to go after. I was dating my girlfriend, now wife, at the time, and she was an academic and had an offer to do her PhD in New Zealand. I thought, what the hell, let's go for it. So we moved to New Zealand together. She went at first. I followed a few months afterwards. And then in New Zealand, I basically decided, look, I'd love to continue doing the business side of show business. The show side is fun, but the business, the doing deals part, that's probably a little bit more aligned to what I want to do long term. So interviewed and got a position at Hayes instead of recruiting for magicians recruiting for software developers, and that was really how I got into recruitment. Spent 5 years there, and then set up on my own. But yeah, that was definitely not the most standard journey into the industry. I kind of fell into it in a way, but not in the way that most people do.
That's really cool. I didn't realize that that was how you did, because I knew you had a background in magic and that kind of thing, but I didn't know that was actually specifically how you got into the recruitment industry. That's really interesting. You must have at some point in your career had someone joke about pulling a candidate like a rabbit out of the hat at some point. Uh,
Hundreds of times. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I doubt I was the first, because I did think about making that joke and decided that you probably heard it a million times. But yeah, that's really cool. Obviously, Hayes, for people who maybe, like, I know we have a lot of American listeners. I don't know if they operate over there. Very, very lot, probably the largest recruitment agency in the UK, certainly, isn't it? It's huge. So you will have dealt with a lot of engineers. Then, is there something kind of as a headline you would say about the state of software engineering in the UK and generally the state of careers? Because we do have a lot of people on here that are actually still in the process of considering becoming a software engineer and not actually broken into the industry yet.
Well, we are still in many ways, from my perspective, at the early days of it, really. I mean, software engineering as a career has not been around for long. I mean, a couple of decades, right?
Mhm.
But if you look at the rate of exponential growth, especially in the past couple of years, and you could even say months with after GPT and everything has happened from that respect, it's still a great path to get into. A lot of the dare I say it, not so good developers are probably going to have challenges once AI starts replacing large elements of the profession. However, the 10x engineers are gonna thrive in my opinion, and continue to do really, really well, and they'll become 100x engineers if that makes sense. So it's still a great career to get into, but I think it's important to treat it as a career and not a side little passion hobby, because you're going to get replaced by an AI bot which can do what you could do 100 times better if you're not careful. So it's just about going the extra mile, and learning not just what you're taught perhaps at university if you're junior, but doing personal projects outside of that, building up your own GitHub portfolio, and all of that in between. Really, it's probably similar, Cam, to what you're told by other people on the show, right? Is that a similar response?
Yeah, pretty similar. I think really it's particularly we've had, as you would imagine, a few ChatGPT discussions recently, and it tends to boil down to ChatGPT won't take your job, but someone using ChatGPT will.
Yeah.
And that's why I was saying it. Pandora's box is open, and these tools are out there now, and you're going to have to learn to utilize them essentially. And yeah, I would definitely echo your advice around how it's all about building up stuff on the side, be that if you're in uni studying comp sci, or if you're being a career changer. Both have their advantages. A lot of people really assume that you're automatically disadvantaged being a career changer. I actually really encourage people to try and lean into it if they've for me, obviously being a former recruiter, it means that actually you pick up a lot of skills that you don't realize about anyway. But then also as well, whilst you're learning, because you've had exposure to commercial issues, albeit from a different approach, you're able to come up with potential solutions to that and think about how can I solve these issues with software. So it's one of the best ways of actually having a commercially viable junior portfolio that is going to stand out versus your peers. Because when I was in uni, I had no idea how. I was doing a business degree, so probably shouldn't really say this, but I had no idea actually day to day how most businesses operated, because you don't when you're sort of 19, and unless you went straight into something after school. So it's I would say it's very much you need to learn to embrace new technologies, and you need to be comfortable being uncomfortable if you're going to learn. I think that's a huge theme. But I think generally for anyone, whatever their profession, like you're better being just slightly out of your comfort zone, always trying to improve a little bit without it being completely overwhelming. And then in terms of that, have you found that? I guess you've been recruiting for what was it, like best part of a decade? I would guess completely
A
complete
little bit less
guess.
than that. Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I did obviously the magic side for a while. I guess you class that
Hmm.
as recruiting to a degree, and then from a purely software engineering perspective, I joined Hayes as a trainee.
Hmm.
Worked my way up the ranks to a consultant and a senior and a team lead and then a manager. And I was in New Zealand for about 3 years, and then we came back after my wife had got her PhD. We came back to the UK to London. I built a few teams in London. And then when I finished with Hayes, I was the UK and Ireland national lead for the software engineering business. So big team. We had 50 plus recruiters, and that was a bit business making millions and millions of pounds a year, all from software engineering recruitment. And I did that for 5 years, and then I've been doing on my own now for almost a year. So a little bit under a decade, but we'll be approaching that
Yeah.
soon, I suppose.
Because I was going to say, do you think it's evolved much during that time, and what
Yeah.
changes have you noticed?
I mean, recruitment itself, from a historical perspective, I mean, the early days of a CV go back to the Egyptian times of people writing it on tablets, right? But the modern recruitment agency really happened around kind of World War II when we had a big shortage in supply and demand, and people needed work. And then you saw the rise afterwards. Hayes had been around for 50 years or something, and then obviously you have the other kind of big corporates, whether that's Michael Page or Adecco or Manpower or Robert Half and Robert Walters, and those are very much the big kind of companies. But in many respects, I would say the dinosaurs to some degree of the industry, and I can say that as somebody who's worked there for 5 years. Great place to be and to learn the career, but I see so much innovation happening in the sector from startup agencies that are doing things differently and really trying to innovate and adapt to the market. And those are not the companies which I mentioned at the start of that spiel. They are some of the more up and coming brands which are doing stuff a little bit more exciting. It's a little bit like the old Apple commercial throwing the big hammer against the IBM man speaking on the video, the 1984 one, if you've seen that. But yeah, I mean, it's changed immensely from when I started. I mean, when I joined Hayes, it was you had to wear a suit and tie every single day. You had to be in at a certain minute. You could not leave after a certain time. You were on the phone, like a physical hand set, going like this every single day, just cold calling back and forth. Teaches you a lot about persistence and how to do business development and go out there to the market. So crushing from a emotional perspective. Thankfully we have flexibility. We have, especially after COVID, a new way of working for most people. I'm working from the home office today, for example, rather than the WeWork in the city. But yeah, I mean, it's changed immensely, from spamming out 100 calls a day to now being more of a consultant and advisor to companies, not working with them, not just to spam out CVs, but really to give them recommendations about best practice when it comes to recruiting, about talent acquisition, and I suppose skill shortages and all of that good stuff in between, really.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I left recruitment I left agency recruitment in 2017, and it was very I've seen it change a lot since then. Like I've actually, because of event sponsorships and stuff, and if I've had to be in a different city, I've worked in certain recruitment agencies' offices as a software engineer, and it's blown me away post COVID how different culturally it seems to be now, and it seems that maybe perhaps that generation of very old school managers have now started to retire post COVID. But I was laughing kind of inside when maybe laughing and crying inside a little bit when you were talking about the phone and like the hundreds of dial outs and your ear just hurting at the end of the day because your handset was up there. But I think it's good for the recruiters because they can function more like a consultant because they have the trust to do their best work, and it's not going to be boiled down to a dial out. And obviously that's then passed on to the candidate because you want to work with someone who genuinely knows what's going on and isn't feeling under pressure to end the call after X amount of minutes and get onto the next dial out or something like that. So I think it's really positive to see how the industry has evolved. particularly for the smaller agencies. And I'm not just saying this. Obviously, you're running your own agency, but I do always encourage people that say to me, I'm curious about working with the recruiter. I do tend to say just go for the smaller agencies because they will properly look after you,
Mm.
which is which is the best thing to do. I mean, obviously, in terms of working with candidates, I mean, you might be a bit different, but I know most recruiters tend to work with people on the more senior end just because it makes more sense business wise. But if you were advising a junior who's trying to break into the industry in 2023, along with the advice you already gave around ChatGPT and embracing it, what would you say is the best thing to do in terms of overall industry trends and what to particularly watch out for?
Well, I talked about GPT, and I think AI is obviously an exciting place to be focused on. But I wouldn't get into the habit of just focusing on whatever's hot and
Mhm.
trending, right? Because 1 minute you're doing Web3, and then the next minute nobody cares about that, and everyone's focused on AI right now. And in 6 to 12 months, it'll be something new, most likely. Apple's going to release their mixed reality headset in a few months. That might take off, and then boom, VR is suddenly the the thing to focus on again. I mean, I'd say pick something that you're passionate about, because if you can do something long term that you enjoy, regardless of what the trends are going to be, you're probably going to become pretty good at it and be able to stick it out. I'm going to misquote it, but Steve Jobs said something like, life's going to hit you in the head with a brick. So it's really important to find something that you really enjoy to do, because as you start to face those challenges and those difficulties, if you don't love what you're doing, you're going to quit because it's going to be too hard. So if you just pick an industry based on what's sexy and what's in the news, then you're probably going to give up when it gets pretty tough, and it's going to get tough at times. That's not just a recommendation for developers, it's a recommendation for pretty much any career, right? Certainly recruitment, definitely. So yeah, find something that you are passionate about, find something that you enjoy, try and find something that does line up to what the market wants. Obviously AI being the most current example of that, but nobody is interested in building software for monolith legacy applications. If you're a developer, learning Cobalt or some legacy technology is not what I'd suggest. If you're passionate about that, maybe change your passion, but be passionate about something that is growing, and don't just make it what's in the news. Make it something that you can be interested in 5 years from now, regardless of what happens with the headlines.
Yeah, the fun factor is absolutely massive because if you're dedicating time, particularly if you're already working in this sort of thing where you're building on it in the evenings and weekends, then you're not going to learn if you're not having fun. And like stuff like the PlayStation controller, the Netflix subscription, that's going to become a lot more appealing if you're not enjoying the code you're doing. And I'm very into business, and I appreciate not every developer is, but I always suggest that people try and work on some kind of entrepreneurial project, like startupgradjobs.com, which is what I'm working on at the moment, should be launched by the time this episode is out. And I just think it's a really good way to keep your skills fresh and work on things you wouldn't otherwise, even if you've already got a job in tech, because it forces you to think outside the box and deal with situations that is normally abstracted to other people. Like, I'm terrified of DevOps because with DevOps, if you do something wrong, it can cost you thousands. So I'm not a DevOps engineer. I'm a front end developer.
Sure.
But on Startup Grad Jobs, I have to do the DevOps. So it's like you pick up these skills that you otherwise wouldn't do. So that's absolutely huge. And what you said as well about not just chasing the big thing. It's important to remember as well that these hype cycles are pretty temporary, but also with those, a lot of the time, if you're early in the hype cycle, you have to time the market right, because right now in AI and Web3, they're not really looking for juniors because they need people that can come in and make an impact right now because it's so high growth. So actually, I would always advise people like learn the fundamentals in terms of the web technologies. Basically, I feel like I could actually sometimes boil this podcast down and just say learn JavaScript or Python,
Yeah.
because then you can just do anything with those. I mean, you've probably seen in all the jobs you've worked on how many are just essentially derivatives of
Yeah.
JavaScript and
I
Python,
mean,
no
the
matter how
timeless.
senior.
I taught myself JavaScript because
Okay.
it's important. I feel, to have that understanding. If I'm recruiting a React or a Angular or a Vue or a Svelte engineer, it's important to not just look for keywords on a CV, but just actually have I don't class myself as a developer, right? But I think learning basic HTML and CSS, and I think it's important just to have a conceptual understanding at the very least. I mean, I did computer science at college, but never to the degree that perhaps you have, Cam. But yeah, I mean, I think more recruiters should be doing that. I think if you, firstly, most tech recruiters don't know a single thing about tech, and they talk about that as if it's something to be proud of, like they're blagging it. That's not something to be proud of, right? If you are not passionate about technology, then you might be able to wing it, but only for so long, because you're going to be having a conversation at some point with some technical leader, and they're going to bring up a point, and it's so much better just to actually understand it, and to be able to ask them a question and shock them to a degree. And hey, have you looked at that company that's doing that, or why don't you try out that framework instead? For, those types of conversations will serve you really, really well as a recruiter. But yeah, I mean, I think understanding tech in terms of just reading the headlines is one thing, but going a little bit deeper and actually understanding it from a product perspective can really separate you if you're in the recruitment game. I appreciate it's not a recruitment podcast, but it seemed like a relevant point.
Yeah, no, I mean it's important, and we do actually, funnily enough, actually have. I reckon it's approximately 5 to 10% of people that listen to this are actually recruiters. So there is a subsegment that are directly recruiters. But yeah, it is important, and it's always good as well, because if you're giving out advice to recruiters, then the developers know kind of what to look for in a good recruiter. And if there's the genuine interest in the technologies, like, no one's expecting a recruiter to be able to build them a full stack web app. But, just like you said, the genuine interest, maybe the fact that, like, as you say, that you've built some stuff in JavaScript because you've self-taught, is absolutely huge. And like, to give some perspective to people listening, on my first day when I got put in the IT team at a recruitment agency, the manager slapped me on the back and he said, "Oh, this is the easiest team. All you'll need to know is Control F," because he just meant that you get a CV off and just Control F for PHP or whatever, and then just spam someone who hasn't used PHP in 17 years for a job that's on the other side of the country. But yeah, I guess it's it's easy to spot the good recruiters all the time. And I think, unfortunately, because of those dinosaurs, people have a lot of devs swear off working with recruiters, and actually there are plenty of really, really good ones out there who will act as a partner with you. That's the biggest thing I think people should look for a recruiter who wants to partner up with you. For me personally, I have like 2 or 3 recruiters that I know, that I trust a lot, and that I work with, and we just check in, like, just text each other sort of every couple of months, see how things are going. And I just trust them to show me good jobs, and a couple of them haven't even placed me before, but I just know that they have my best interests, and that's really important, I think. I mean, is there anything else that you would say, like green and red flags, that candidates should look out for if they're faced with that first agency recruiter message on LinkedIn?
That's a good question, right? Well, I suppose green flags would be decent tenure. The thing about recruitment is you see a recruiter join one company, and then 3 months later they're at another agency, 6 months later they're at another agency. And I mean, there's only so long you can keep that up before saying, you can blame the agency at the end of the day if you're a recruiter. But after the third one, you kind of have to realize
what's the common denominator.
yeah. 3 of the fingers are pointing back at yourself, right? So, I was with Hayes for 5.5 years or something, and great time there, and enjoyed my time climbing my way up the business, but ultimately felt like it was time to innovate a little bit in the sector that I worked in, and that's kind of why I wanted to go and do my own thing. So I suppose tenure would be something that's important if you're working with a recruiter. If they're jumping all over the place, then they might get you an interview one day, and then the next week they're gone and they're in another company. I suppose that would be a green flag, also a red flag. But basic lack of research. If you get pinged a message on LinkedIn and you have one of those little emojis before your first name trying to filter out the spam, I mean, it's a it's a good technique in many ways, because it just shows that somebody's done a massive mail or email blast to hundreds, if not thousands, of people, hoping that 1% of them come back and are relevant. You can do that, and it will work in the short term, but then long term, all the people that you've messed around, they're not going to come back to you and see you as a respected advisor. They're going to see you as somebody just praying and praying and hoping for the best. So I suppose work with recruiters that have done the hard yards, they've been there for a while, that they know what it takes, and avoid the time wasters that are treating you as a number. Look for the ones that value you as a person.
Yeah, I think a decent amount of personalization in a LinkedIn message is always huge as well. And something I do on my profile, it's a bit sneaky, but it's buried in the About Me section. And just says, like, look, if you're a recruiter and you want to just prove that, like, you've properly read my profile, then tell me about your pet in your first message. And the reason why I like it as well, actually, is because I did wonder when I put it, I was like, oh, does this make me seem really self-important? But then also as well, I thought, actually, it's quite a nice opener for them to like send me a nice message about and like let me know that they're a human. So it's nice. I get loads of pictures of golden retrievers and stuff in my inbox, so no one could complain about that. So that's a tip I'd say to people as well. And would you say it's worth getting on the phone with someone early on, or is it better just to deal with people via emails or LinkedIn these days?
Oh, I'm a big proponent of the phone. Mm-hmm. I think I hate texting with people. It's I think texting is good for confirming details, but if you want to have a conversation or try to persuade somebody, then you need to be on the phone. Prior to COVID, I was a bit of a meeting face-to-face kind of guy. I tried to even stay away from the phone. The point of a message for me was to get a phone call, and the point of a phone call was to get a face-to-face meeting. Now face-to-face meetings, unfortunately, are a little bit kind of behind us in a lot of respects. And Zoom has it's okay, but it's not quite the same, is it? But I think try and get in front of people face to face is the best way for me to prevent through, conferences. There's so many of them, and they're all so many free ones as well. If you can't do that, try and get them on video. If you can't do that, get them on the phone. Last case scenario, I think LinkedIn and email. I know there are people that believe the exact opposite of that, but I just find it's really hard to actually assess if a recruiter's good or if a candidate's good via message. I think it's a waste of time for the most part. I think you need to speak to people like we're humans. We're not robots. Not yet, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you touched on that about events. I think if you're a candidate, I say candidate, if you're a developer who's potentially looking for a new job and you end up meeting recruiters at events, I would always say that's a green flag if they're taking time out, especially if it's the evening or something, to actually try and get involved in the ecosystem. I think that's always huge. And generally speaking, I find that's a green flag for agencies as well. Like as a wider group, if they're like willing to support community events. Like I partner with one in Glasgow that host all the podcast meetups in Glasgow, and it works really well, and it's always a really green flag. But still talking about red and green flags, but let's be a bit more fair on the recruiters now and flip it round to the developers. You've obviously seen probably maybe tens of thousands of developer CVs at this point. What are the massive red and green flags for you on a developer's CV?
I'd say we'll start with red flags, right? Because that's a little bit easier to complain about. I think just if your CV is more than 2 or 3 pages, clearly you're not able to be concise and eloquent and summarize that. It doesn't matter how much experience you've got. I mean, nobody cares about what you did 10 years ago. Just keep that to a couple of lines max, if that. The most recent bullet points. I'd say bullet points should equal bragging points. Everyone knows what a developer does responsibility rise. So writing that you write code is not of value to anybody reading that CV. You talk about specifically what achievements you've made, use numbers, talk about what you've done, not what the team's done, but what you did as an individual. I think that's really important. And that would be I suppose a red and a green flag, a red flag from the perspective of it being too long. I think one thing that's very important is just spell checking. I mean, it's absolutely fine if English is not your first language, but it's no excuse to not spell check and not, perhaps even have a recruiter, which most of them will do it for free. Just have them, sanity check it for you, or you can just find some service online. It won't cost you much just to do a proofread. I see so many CVs where they spell the word developer wrong. They spell the company they're working for wrong. I saw one the other day, they spelled their own name wrong. Now, if like I'm saying, it's not a problem if English is not your first language. The majority of the candidates that I work with are from probably India and China, and other places of Europe as well. But if you're not taking the time to cover the basics, and then are you really taking the time as a developer? Are you going to be making issues on your code as well? Probably. The CV is an important document, and the point of the CV is to get you an interview, right? I mean, the point of the interview is to get you the job. But if you can't get the CV right, then you're probably not going to get the interview to begin with. I think a good green flag would be just customization. It really takes 5 minutes to slightly alter a CV, and I'm not talking about twisting the truth. I'm talking about highlighting specifics which make you relevant for that particular role. So if you're applying to a gaming company and you have no mention of the word gaming on your CV, then it's going to be one of many. But if in your free time you really enjoy playing games, maybe you've played 3 of their games that studio produces, you could add a short paragraph at the top of your CV talking about that, talking about what you liked about them, what you didn't like about them. Customization. If you see on you could see the job being advertised, and you could find out who the recruiter is. Let's say they're really into skiing. If you are as well, I mean, if you're not, then don't do this. But if you are, then great. You could mention that at the top of your CV. I've seen some CVs recently which have gone the extra mile with this, and it's amazing. I had somebody build a custom CV for one of my clients in the style of that client's website. And they
Oh,
turned
wow.
their CV into their website. I didn't ask them to do this, but when they sent that to me, I thought, yeah, this guy's good. I didn't even read the CV. I just knew that this person was going to be good. I had somebody, a lady recently, who sent a 20-minute video along with her CV, where on half of the screen she had the job description, on the other half of the screen she had her CV and her face, and she was going through each point of the JD, describing on video how she done what they were looking for. So go the extra mile. Keep it to a short document, but try to put a spin on it which makes you stand out from the masses. Because if there's going to be a lot of candidates applying, why should they pick you for the interview? So I mean, there's quite a lot of info there, but hopefully some of that is beneficial.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it always comes down to it's much better to send out 10 detailed, properly, thoroughly researched and customized job applications than it is even 1,000 spray and praise.
Yeah.
It's funny how many parallels there are between the career of a recruiter and the career of a developer. Because for a recruiter, if they send out 1,000 spray and pray messages versus 10 very tailored messages to a candidate, they're going to have better results. And it's the same the other way around. I totally agree. And, it doesn't take much to customize your CV slightly for each job. Things like as you mentioned, the similar to me effect, where you find a common interest or mutual interest with the recruiter. Like I always suggest people, if you apply for a job, find a recruiter on LinkedIn. It's usually pretty easy. Send them a message, just say, hey, I really like this job and your company because of X, Y, Z. And then, let them know if they've got any questions. They can follow up, or even better, if you happen to have any questions, like not just made up ones, like genuine questions, then it's going to make all the difference. And particularly for a junior dev job, like it's a bit different when you're senior and you're a bit more in demand. But for a junior dev, it's the only one where the market is truly against you, so to speak. So it can make all the difference. Like when I was an internal recruiter and the first time I advertised a junior job, I must have had 200 applications,
Yeah.
and just it was the people that went the extra mile to drop me a line on LinkedIn and that kind of thing. You can't help but end up being giving them a bit more attention, end up almost being a bit biased towards that in the process. So that's absolutely huge. And yeah, I totally agree about your point on attention to detail on CV, because coding is, the review process of code is huge if you're going to try and merge it into the code base. And I'm saying this as someone who had a real clangor applying for a really cool startup for my first job, I said that I worked somewhere for 10 years by mistake instead of 1 year. And they messaged me back and it was like, the attention to detail wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I was gutted, but it was a completely fair decision on their part. So these things are huge. And I think the other thing that goes out the window a little bit with devs sometimes, you get so tunnel vision about how it's all just about the coding, and actually how much of it is about business sense. And you can really convey that much better in an application than you can in any kind of coding test.
Yeah, there's an old quote with, I think it was the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, a really great book on how to build relationships. And it says that 85% of success is about your ability to deal with people, even in technical fields like engineering. So, I mean, the best coders a lot of the time are I just the best people, and they can then build teams of engineers to achieve goals a lot quicker, because you can do it a lot faster with an army rather than as an individual a lot of the time. But just to go back to your point about the power of being specific and tailoring stuff. I'm the editor of Coder magazine, which is a tech publication where we repurpose a lot of the my podcast content, and we've recently started to reach out there and look for people doing guest submissions and writing a few sort of opinion articles on coding and technology, and we put out a call to our database of thousands of engineers, if anybody would like to contribute to this. And we had so many people just completely miss the criteria of what we were looking for. We were very specific: how many words, what type of content would be appreciated, etc., etc. Most people just sent back like a Medium link or a Substack link, sort of thing. But the people that had done the research and took the time to do that, and sent through, the right amount of words and the right amount of detail. Obviously, those are the ones that we featured in the publication. Whereas the people that didn't take the time to do any of that preparation and research, even if it was very small, didn't stand a chance because they didn't meet the criteria. So you're right that there's a lot of parallels between a recruiter and a developer, but I think that point applies to pretty much anything in life, whether that's writing, whether that's podcasting, whether that's speaking, building a business, or anything in between, really.
Yeah. It's one of those things that it can just make a huge difference as well, just producing any kind of content. Like, have you come across the Learn in Public movement much in terms of context of coding?
Learning public in terms of sort of open sourcing your personal development and talking about,
Yeah.
I think it's a great way to do it. I do that quite actively on Twitter. We've built up a following of it must be like 14,000 people now that I've followed my open source journey of building a business, building a podcast, building writing, and if you go back to my early posts, it's hey, I'm just thinking about starting a podcast, and then 3 years later, it's hey, we've just booked this billionaire on the show. So I think there's something quite valuable in learning in public, because public humiliation and accountability works. If you say I'm going to do something and you post that on social media and then you don't do it, and you have a good connections of friends who are willing to hold you accountable and say, hey, you haven't done that. Where is that app? Where is that side project? To me personally, I hate looking like an idiot in public, so I will work till the early hours of the morning if I have to not fail on what I've posted online. So I'm a big believer in open sourcing and publicly declaring what you're going to do. I think it works.
Yeah, there's so many aspects to it, because you're much more likely to actually get it done. I mean, I try and practice it as much as possible. I mean, earlier in the show, I literally said startup grad jobs should be out now, and I'm going to look like a Wally if it's not. I have another aspect of that where I have a shout out to my friend Dan Bruce, who also builds in public. We have a bet on with each other where if I don't get it out by the end of April, I've got to give a tenner to Dogs Trust if I don't. And if I do get it out, he's going to give a tenner to Dogs Trust. So either way, the dogs win. But you can have all these little things, and it's absolutely massive, particularly if you're trying to get your first job in tech. Like, just if you set up a Twitter account where it's like, oh, this is my learn to code journey, and then how good is it for a recruiter to be able to click on that and just see you go through that journey and like building and improving, and like the qualities it takes to be a great engineer are just so clearly on display. Like if I'm hiring, then that's the exact kind of person that I'm going to pick, even if they're maybe technically 5% weaker than someone who hasn't got any kind of history of that sort of thing, because it just goes to show they've got all of the intangibles that someone would need. So yeah, I love the whole build in public, learn in public. It's I think I credit it to actually a lot of me actually being able to get stuff done much more over
Well,
the last year or two.
it makes content creation easier as well. I mean, in
Mhm.
2023, everybody wants to be a content creator, and
Yeah.
I think it's I've been creating content. I've had a YouTube channel for a decade now, right? Going back to videos of me performing as a magician, and now obviously a very very different type of posts. But if you're documenting the journey, then that's the easiest type of content there is to create, because you're not having to create anything. You're just sharing about what you're doing as you're going along. So I mean, if for people that want to create content, which is important for personal brand, I mean that's almost a necessity in today's market. If you want to stand out from everybody else, then the easiest way of doing it is you don't need to sit down and plan and produce and then create and then edit and then get something out there. You can just document the journey, and then in 10 years you can look back on everything that's been involved in that process, and your I hate the word followers, but that the people that watch that will really enjoy it, because they will have seen the evolution, and they'll be along you on that progression. They'll root for you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely, and I don't mind kind of sharing when I've messed stuff up, like when I've made bad decisions around content, or like around making the wrong decisions with building, and I think it's important that both I learn from my mistakes and other people can as well. I think it's good, and I think people should share when not just the successes, but when stuff goes a bit wrong as well. Like I always like to, one of my go-to lines when I'm trying to make someone feel better, because they feel inadequate, is I always try and say like, oh, you see everyone else's highlight reel, but you just view your own bloopers. And I think we could all do with showing our bloopers sometimes, because it's not about embarrassing ourselves, it's about showing kind of what we've learned, because I'm very much a believer of, we're building products particularly by coding, you either win or learn, really. So I really encourage people to get over the shyness of first kind of posting about your learning, because like it is, I found it really hard at first, and I thought, oh, what if people are going to make fun of me for not being a really great developer, but like no one ever did that, and people were actually so helpful. And when I lost my job early in the pandemic, actually, and I got like over 1,000 retweets from the tech community. Like it's a genuinely really really nice and kind place that will help you upgrade your skills. So I definitely encourage people to get on there and start documenting your journey. It's yeah, and then, like you said, it's nice to look back on as well, isn't it?
Yeah, win or learn is the mindset, right? And surely you'd rather have those people almost knowing who you are and potentially criticizing you, rather than just not knowing who you are to begin with. I mean, you've got to be willing to
Yeah.
get in the arena and risk risk the punches. You can't just stand on the sidelines watching other people do all the fighting. Sometimes, I mean, as a life wasted, in my opinion. You only get one of them, as far as we know, right? So why not try and give it everything that you have, and win or learn. That's a really good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
um you know you only really fail if you give up. So if you don't
Mhm.
give up, then you haven't failed. I appreciate that sounds super Tony Robbins cheesy, but I think it's true.
And it's important to note that pivoting isn't giving up as well. Like just because you're switching your business model or switching your goals doesn't mean that you've given up. And I think that's important to remember. Like in the context of programming, if you decide to switch from learning JavaScript to Python, doesn't mean you've given up. Or you decide, or even perhaps you decide, oh, actually, do you know what? I think I'd be a better UI UX designer instead of a front end developer. That's not giving up. That's just pivoting your goals. So yeah, I totally agree. And as you said earlier, yeah. There's no point being afraid of what people are saying. I think Oscar Wilde, I think, said the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. So
Sure.
I'm a big believer in that as well. And in terms of like on a wider spectrum, obviously we're in the interesting times to say the least in the world, but specifically the UK. What do you see as the future of the UK technology scene, seeing as you're working day in day out with a lot of, I imagine, high growth companies?
Yeah. Well, we're really at the early days of this whole AI stuff, right? And the interesting thing is what happens when the AI starts creating AI, which starts creating AI, right? I think Kurzweil predicted 2045 for the singularity. Maybe he was perhaps even a little bit timid in that prediction. I think we're about to enter the craziest time in all of history because of exponential growth. It's not about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's about 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. And then by the time we're at 30, we're at billions. I think more is in the next decade. More will happen in a month than happened previously in a year, and then pretty soon more will happen in a week than happened in 10 years in terms of innovation. Um, I think generative AI. I think text to text with GPT was a start. Obviously, text to pictures with DALL-E and Midjourney and everything. I think text to video is going to be coming soon, and I think very soon you'll be able to type in, hey, show me this, and you'll be able to create a movie out of a couple of prompts. That makes me worried as somebody who hosts a podcast. I'm not going to lie, but I don't know if what we do as a medium is still going to be. I don't know if you've seen the AI Joe Rogan podcast that came out a couple of weeks ago, but somebody's created an entire episode of Joe Rogan, and you can't tell listening to it, you don't know if it's AI or not. So they haven't got the video component on those done yet, but when that happens, it'll be interesting because we won't know what's real. I think Elon might have been onto something with the Twitter verification ticks, to see if that's the source of truth. But then what happens when Joe Biden's Twitter gets hacked and there's a deep fake of him declaring war on Russia? What happens then? So I think we're in for really interesting times globally when it comes to tech. I think the UK is really just an extension of that. I mean, what it tends to happen to begin with in the US, and then obviously in the Valley, and then it kind of rolls out everywhere else. The UK being very closely behind. But I don't know if those timescales are going to be super relevant anymore because GPT went from, it was the fastest growing product service ever in history. It went from 0 to 1 million users in a couple of days, and 100 million. Not so many days after that. If you look at the Google search trends, it's just kind of not a hockey stick. It would just be like an eye, and
skyscraper, yeah.
straight going up, right? So, that bleeds into robotics. Really interesting stuff being done, obviously Boston Dynamics, but a lot of other companies around that are doing some very interesting stuff. And when that connects,
I'm speaking with someone tomorrow on the podcast who used to be CEO of a robotics company. So yeah, there's definitely a lot going on there.
Yeah, no, I mean that entire space with machine learning is super interesting. Web3 kind of, in many respects, has died a bit of a death, but I think it's going to rise from the ashes to a degree and be super relevant again once people start to come up with practical use cases of a lot of that technology. I interviewed recently Dr. Craig Wright on my podcast, who many people believe is Satoshi Nakamoto. I'm not as convinced as perhaps some of those people, but it was a very interesting episode. And regardless of if you believe him or not, blockchain technology is got so much application and possibility which hasn't been utilized yet. I know there's some crazy predictions around the future of Bitcoin, and I know there's like Balaji who reckons in I think 60 days he's got left on his bet. He reckons it'll be at 1 million per coin.
Oh yeah, how's he doing with that? Because I heard about that on my first million last month, and I thought surely not. I mean, I've got some, so I hope it does. But
I think it's at about
yeah,
30,000 at the moment.
because it's rallied big time.
Yeah, I mean it's gone up, but obviously not to the degree. I think his thesis is, SBV has collapsed, but he believes that many other banks are insolvent, and we just don't know about it yet. And we'll start to find out about that in the next couple of weeks. Who knows? We'll see, right? But I think that technology itself has got crazy potential. And NFTs have been used for the most silly reason yet, but we could be using that for every receipt could be an NFT, every concert ticket. There's so much possibility there. So I think a lot of, if you look at the Gartner hype, trend cycle, whatever you call it, I think a lot of those technologies have kind of gone down, and that now they're starting to come back up again, which will be really, really interesting over the next decade. But I mean, I think your question was really just around UK tech trends, right? I think all those areas I've mentioned are going to explode, and it's going to be the craziest time ever to be alive. And I think it's going to be either really, really great and amazing, or it's gonna be dystopian, cyberpunky. Who I don't think anyone knows the answer, but yeah, what a time to be alive, anyway.
Yeah, and what a time to be involved in the technology industry. So, and I think the nature of the job will always end up evolving alongside whatever technologies emerge from it. So, it's never been a better time to get into technology, even if the market has dipped somewhat, for sure. So, yeah, I agree with you. Very exciting times ahead, and it remains to be seen what ends up happening. But it's been really awesome having you on the show today. Really, really cool chat. And I've just realised, I think it's the first time in about 30 episodes that we've had someone from the recruitment world on. So it's been long overdue. So thank you for contributing from the other side of the fence there as well. That's been great. And if people want to find yourself, your book, your podcast, what's the best way?
All the links are on alfiewhattam.com. I'm sure you can put a thing on the screen or in the comments or something. So yeah, click on that, and then best way to hit me up is on Twitter or LinkedIn. And all my links are on the website. Podcast is doing well. We're starting to bring on a lot of big guests, people that you would know in the world of tech. We have a lot of really interesting people that follow the show and like the show. We had Michael Dell on Twitter the other day, engaging with it. When you got the 12th richest man in the world talking about the pod,
pretty cool.
Yeah, you're on a good journey. So for people that want to learn about the future of technology and a little bit more about what I talked about today, then that's probably the best place to do it. If you want to learn about how to advance in your career, how to grow your team, your business, the book's the best place. Working on a couple of books at the moment, which will probably be revealed towards the end of this year. I really want to make sure that I get those right. I think when I wrote my first book, a lot of fun, but I really wish I doubled down and really wrote a book and really went the extra mile with that. Perhaps didn't follow my own advice to some degrees on that. It was a little bit shorter than I perhaps would have liked. When I originally wrote it, it was big, and then I kind of got that's
away.
Yeah, you chop away. But I think it would be good to chop away, and then do that same routine, chop away, and then get something that's pretty big. Saying that though, with the way that you can write a book from a prompt on GPC, who knows, maybe if that will be even relevant in a couple of years. So yeah, I mean, everything's on alfiewhattam.com.
Cool. Sounds good. Well, yeah, thanks again for coming on, and thank you as well to the listeners for tuning in to another episode of The Coder Career. You can find me on YouTube, Twitter, and everything else. Similarly, it's on my link tree, which is in the description.